Yeah, nice.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 109th week anniversary. We've got a milestone Cinco de Mayo. But you're going to have to bring your own chips and salsa today. All right. So, but Jack's got the background. Adam's got the cool new puppy. Oh my goodness. This is going to be a day of cuteness as we talk about succession planning. And speaking of succession planning, I'm turning 60 this weekend, so I've got the official oldometer shirt. So,
and where is the party at? You're going to text everyone the address, right?
Yeah, we're actually Jennifer's Shanghai me down to Florida, so that'll be fun. Looking forward to it. So, there's all kinds of stuff going on in this crazy world. Besides Cinco de Mayo, we may need to add some extra salt around the rim today. I don't know. But before we launch into, so you just got hit by a bus, now what? And talking about more on the succession planning, I'm just curious, Jack, do you have anything coming out of, the White House with sombrero on it?
Sure. So, well, something a little more local. Actually, it's happening nationwide, but the closest thing with the Starbucks and unionization of the workers. And so there was a big article about that. And I was with a bunch of franchisors yesterday and our franchisees, multi-unit franchisees, and, had a lot of discussion about unionizing. So there's a Starbucks in Boone that has begun that process and trying to unionize and organize, et cetera. But that is something that started, I think, probably in California. I think that's right. Probably. It's working its way eastward. So there's that. There was an article about PPP stuff. It's been a while since we've talked about that, but just, you typically try to throw out some statistics, some current statistics. And so the SBA, and this is as of a couple of days ago, approved more than 1 trillion in PPP loans. And out of the 11.4 million loans, representing $788 billion in total funding, about 88% have been fully or partially forgiven. And that amounts to 10 million applications requesting $725 billion in total forgiveness and 721 billion paid out. So we are getting towards the end of that. I did have some discussions this week with businesses who have not submitted their forgiveness applications, and some that have not received their forgiveness letter. So time is winding down. So you do have some time, but go ahead and get it done. With respect to the small SBA, the SBA tried to put into the 2022 federal fiscal budget. It was, how much was it? It was a lot of money, but it was appropriation that would allow them to directly lend. So I think most of us are familiar with the SBA being a guarantor of loans that are issued by third-party banks. The SBA does have a direct lending program. We saw some of that with some of the COVID funding, and they wanted to continue to do that. And Congress said, nope, we're going to go back to having mostly private funding with the SBA being a guarantor rather than actual dollars going out the door for loans. So just a couple updates on some current events.
Yeah, that's good. So Adam, you got to talk and give us some updates, and you got to show us this cute little puppy.
Sure. Probably the most important thing to cover off on is say hello to Chewy. Oh my gosh. Oh, sorry. There you go. Say hello to Chewy. She says hi.
Chewy. Oh my gosh.
Named after May the 4th. So anywho, my grandfather had a Chinese pug, and he was made it all the way through 5th grade.
Wow.
Before he had to go to work to support his family during the Depression. World War II vet. started, as a lot of entrepreneurs do that start their own business. He started his own business because he couldn't find anybody that would grade and make a pond for him for his farm. So he rented a dozer, made a pond. Other farmers in Oklahoma liked it, and next thing you know, he is the biggest grading contractor and cement producer in Kay County, Oklahoma.
Really?
So, but he had a Chinese pug named Clyde. So I've always liked pugs. Everybody's got like a weird thing about him. Anywho,
oh, he's so cute.
Yeah, probably the biggest thing I had this week, we sent out an email about it. Jack's talked about it in the past, but the North Carolina Business Recovery Grant, they just changed the eligibility rules around that to where, first off, you don't have to be in hospitality. It could be any business if you meet the gross receipts reduction test. And also, if you already received some government funds, then you're eligible. I mean, the way that I read this is that, the qualifying criteria is a little bit different in terms of the test period, but basically, if your sales were down greater than 20% from March 2019 through February of 21 relative to the same rolling 12-month time period, you're eligible. And it's up to $500,000. The way that it works, they pay a percentage of that actual loss. So, if you had received no funds from anybody, period, and your sales were down $2.5 million during that time period, you get the full $500,000 from North Carolina. If you received other funds, meaning PPP, the restaurant revitalization fund, all that kind of stuff, you can still get 10% of your economic loss. So the way I'm reading this is that, if you qualified for PPP 2, there's a pretty darn good chance you qualify for this too, and you might as well get some free money. And I mean, it really just comes down to that, the state of North Carolina has unspent CARES Act funds and they're trying to spend them because presumably they can't appropriate them for anything else.
Unless free puppies for everybody. Just thinking.
Free puppies.
Oh man. Yeah, that's good. Those are good updates. Got a nice crew on today, and normally I will not shout anybody out that's on, but I'm going to today because one of my favorite friends that I've worked with since 1997, Andy Hilliard. I saw you on there. So you're probably multitasking, and I know you are, Andy. So it's good to see you on here. Pay attention.
Well, he would not be multitasking if he said cute puppy at him.
That's true. Oh, yeah, we'll see. Are you paying attention, Andy? So we teed today up with that question. So you get hit by a bus, you got hit by a bus, now what? And not that we're trying to be morbid, and especially, as I'm getting ready to turn 60 and join Andy in those ranks. There is a serious part of that, which is you don't even have to be to the point where, oh, what if I do get hit by a bus? You're going to be free if you are actually doing some planning so that people know what to do in your absence. Let's say you want to take off for the summer and go down to Florida, right? So what are you going to do? You probably can't if you don't have much succession planning going on. So before I go into some questions about that, because I think we should go into some stuff like on ESOPs and stuff like that, things that can be done. But I would love to go into scenarios where Adam, or you, I know you do a lot of this consulting with our clients. Give me an example where somebody actually took heed and did something about it. And maybe you've got an example, Jack, as well, or one where they didn't do anything about it and something happened and they suffered some consequences because of it.
So I'll go, we've kind of been blessed, that at least with it, as far as broader BGW is concerned, and, definitely the clients that I work with directly, we haven't had, that I'm aware of, any calamities that have happened related to somebody, meaning just period. Like I had everything buttoned up, and then as soon as I had it buttoned up, I had a massive heart attack and died. So the story that I'll share actually, happened right out of the gate, about when I started the business. One of our first clients was a company that did janitorial services, but they were a minority owned company, which is because, big companies have a percentage of spend that they have to award out, based on, their what they've said in their SEC filings to minority companies. And when you look at, where you're going to spend that money, there just aren't a lot of options. So janitorial and maintenance ends up being one of them. So they made pretty good living off of being a minority certified company. And I remember going out to, guy's name is Bill, super smart guy. Actually used to work at Bank of America. You guys might actually know him, Gary, from your guys' stay there. But he was a member at Carmel, was playing golf with them, and he was talking about, he's a smoker and a drinker. And he was talking about, I'm not a spring chicken. I need to retire at some point, get some stuff buttoned up. I just need to start thinking about my succession plan. And I was like, yeah, Bill, you really ought to wrap up, have a couple beers in the clubhouse, call it a day. And he died 2 weeks later.
Wow.
Massive heart attack discovered in his apartment. Well, in that particular case, the multiple calamity of problems, is that, it's a certification process to be a minority owned company. And even though his partner was also African American, his partner was not certified. So, they have all these contract renewals coming up with massive Fortune 500 companies that the whole business value, a lot of it's contingent upon this minority certification, which they don't have anymore because the guy's dead. In addition to that, there was they didn't have a shareholders agreement. The entire thing was silent on what should the estate get. So it was it really, for me, was the point that I truly became passionate about succession planning and estate planning for business owners. Because before that, save money, taxes, you'll die later. That'll be a problem for the future. And then, Bill was the first death that happened, and it happened like, 4 months into us starting BGW as a company. And we're now having to deal with this complete shit show with the business and the family. Everybody's wondering about how they're going to, eat, whether the contracts are going to get renewed. As you can imagine, they got really big receivables, really massive payables. Are we going to be able to make payroll? Because our contracts even going to get paid, because now we technically don't have the certification anymore. It was a total mess that really kind of kicked me into action in terms of, wow, if I can solve anybody's problem or raise awareness about anything, it sounds silly, but it's like something as basic as this, because nobody, we all think that we're invincible, and the answer is that we're not. And we all think, hey, it'll be pretty evident to people what they need to do if something bad happens. And the answer is no. It's not evident to people. And a lot of times there is stuff that you didn't even think about that is going to come out of the woodworks to come get you.
Man, that's a powerful one. Jack, I'm sure you've got some thoughts.
Oh yeah, it happens all the time. So kind of piggybacking on what Adam said about certifications, he mentioned, minority certification, but professional certifications as well, for emergency situations, whether it's an engineer or someone else. and that being tied to the business in order for it to continue doing business. So we see those issues come up. But I have a more recent example from the beginning of COVID, and I received a phone call and several phone calls on my cell phone and some text messages, and it was, hey, I have an emergency situation. I don't know what's going to happen to me. I need to talk to you. And I didn't get the messages immediately. The next set of messages were specific instructions on what he wanted done in case of death. He had contracted COVID. He was in the hospital. He was about to be intubated. His wife was there, but she was frantic. He survived. She is his business partner, but kind of just helping out kind of things, where he is the driving force. He does have other business partners that are equity owners in the business, but he is the person that's running it. And so I printed out all those texts and just had them, and everything turned out fine. But the text I was receiving was, okay, this is what's going on with this business. This is what's going on. And there were several business lines. This is what's going on with this. And I'm like, it's stuff that I could have found out, or anybody could have found out to help under certain circumstances if he has passed away. But, and it was also, I'd like for this to be done, this to be done, this to be done. Things like, I would like my partners to buy my shares out, but find a replacement for me to make sure the transition is smooth and all these things. And so all the things that I'm thinking that obviously, I didn't tell him I told you so or anything like that, crude like that, but I'm thinking, okay, first of all, praying that he survives. And then he did do, after, when he recovered, do the things that all business owners should do, which is think about getting hit by a bus, think about getting COVID, think about your own mortality, kind of thing. Because I will tell you, former college athlete, former professional athlete, he is, in great health, had a clean bill of health in his prior several years physicals, and COVID just knocked him off his ass. And so, or knocked him onto his ass. And so you have to have those things in place. And Adam mentioned shareholders agreements, operating agreements. Okay. Don't assume that what you want to be done is going to get done in your absence. Shareholders agreements, and operating agreements really have, well, let's go back fundamentally. A operating agreement is a combination essentially of bylaws and a shareholders agreement. So you have management, and then you have ownership issues, either separate or together, depending if you're an LLC or corporation, essentially. But, and you have two options. You have, one is, which is the majority option, which is, I die, I want my business partners to buy my interest out and pay my family fair market value for my ownership interest, and life goes on. If I am the surviving owner and one of my partners passes away, I want to be able to run the business how I want to run the business, and not have someone who really isn't involved necessarily in the business telling me or whispering in my ear saying, I would rather you do it this way or that way. A 50-50 ownership and a catastrophe or fatality in that relationship can be fatal to the business. And so you think about those things. In a minority of circumstances or in situations, it is, yes, I built this with my business partner. And yes, I do want my beneficiaries, my children and my spouse, to receive an annuity payment every year in the form of distributions, dividends, after I'm gone, on the back of my business partner's work, because we got to a certain point, I helped build the foundation, and so my family should reap the benefits of it, not just the current value, but the increase, hopefully increasing value, building on that foundation by the surviving partner. So, but which way are you going to go with it? And there is a presumption that, well, we'll figure it out. And, hey, my wife, my husband really doesn't want to be involved in the business. So, and my business partner doesn't want them to be involved in the business. Then, everything will be fine. Everything will turn out the way everyone thinks they want it to turn out, until someone who is in a position of power meaning the beneficiary or the surviving partner says, yeah, I don't think so. We're going to do it differently. And a kind of an extreme example, and this actually happened twice in the past 10 years, have a restaurant owner who has business partners. They very kind of loose because they trust each other with respect to management. So you have an operating agreement that says any manager can do anything at any time they want because the managers are the members, they're owners. So, okay. One of the partners passes away. The beneficiary of the estate is the 22-year-old son of the deceased member. This is a bar and restaurant. Guess what started happening? Hey,
Free drinks,
free food. Let's go hang out here. This is our first stop and last stop. And so, so I had to put a stop to that, basically say, no, this isn't a perk of being an owner. And it might've been okay, maybe, but is a rowdy bunch. And, he thought he was the BMOC and he's strutting in there with his friends and, beautiful girls and everybody's, so it was a mess. So anyway, take that scenario and not as elaborate, but put it into somewhere else where you have someone who is maybe not mature enough to be an owner and doesn't see things the way you do as the surviving owner. So just a couple of war stories to share, to be aware of.
Hey, we've got a good question that's already come in here regarding this. As I work through my own transition, I've discovered that if you're still healthy, you still need to develop another purpose in life. So this is a statement. I agree, Joe. When every waking moment has been dedicated to your company, this can be a huge hole to fill. That is a great point, Joe, because you raise a very important point, which is if your job, if your company defines you and it's gone or you sell, and we've seen this, haven't we, Adam, where somebody sells, oh, it's going to be great, but then all of a sudden they get their check cashed and they still have to honor their workout or whatever, but they're taking orders from somebody else. That's one thing. But then also, like, what gets you up in the morning once that's gone? If that defines us, and it's really easy, especially for guys, I can just speak that because I know that. If that changes, and I've seen guys that did well, punched out, thought that playing golf, even though they never played golf to make their money, hey, this is going to be the great thing, bored off of their gourd after about 3 months. And then they went into depression. I know a couple of them that did, and then they had to get pulled out by some other good friends that helped them find that purpose. So thank you for bringing that up, Joe. That was really good. Here's a question that I want you guys to think about, Jack and Adam. I think it's a fair statement to say everybody kind of knows, yeah, we need to do that as business owners. Yeah, we need to do that. And we've seen that kind of play out in our polling in the last few weeks. But not everybody does, because it can be onerous. Yes, you got to think about it. And yes, you got to communicate. And it's delicate because it brings some people in, some people it alienates. There are all kinds of things that go on. You need some legal counsel. You need some accounting, strategic help as well. What are some practical things that you have seen where somebody has just taken practical baby steps or, larger steps, whatever? You don't build it overnight. That's for doggone sure. Not a good one. What are some things that our audience can implement that you've seen? Oh yeah, this worked really well. If you've got an example, that'd be great.
Yeah. So I'll share one that's relatively recent. Because because it literally just happened after this client became a client of BGW in 2014, and problem is now not solved, but at least pretty damn close to being solved as of May 5th, 2022. So
Wow.
well, I really need to do something about this in 2014, resolved in 2022. All, again, because, guys, cancer survivor, but otherwise young and healthy. But what he ended up doing for his succession plan, I mean, this is something that all of us can do. All of us have key people that, it would kind of be devastating to lose them, at some level. So what he ended up doing to make sure that there would be some continuity in the event that he died is, he created a stock appreciation program, so that the key, and he had 1 year earlier implemented a bonus program that was kind of had a multi-year vesting schedule associated with it. So between those two things, what he did is he got some more stickiness with the key employee group. And in parallel, he appointed a board that their role will be that if something bad happens to him, there is an orderly transition of the business to a buyer, which could be the employees, could be, a third party, but the employees are now incented to make that a good transaction because they're going to get a cut of it. Whereas before it's just like, well, hey, Gary died. That's not good. I need to start looking for a new job. Now they're incented to, something bad happens, we know what the role, what's supposed to happen here. What's supposed to happen here is orderly transition. Let's get this baby signed up and shined up and sold, run it through a process. You guys are all going to get paid a lot of money if that happens, to the point, to put it in context. I mean, at this company valuation, the employee, not only will the family be taken care of, but the employee that helps with the transition will get, the equivalent of about 7 years salary in a transaction by helping out with an orderly transition. That's not bad. I mean, that's like saying, hey, something bad happens to me, my family will still be taken care of, but guess what? I just made your retirement too. I mean, that's a pretty cool setup that he's been working on for a long time, and he finally put it in place. I mean, I literally last week was sitting with the employee group, explaining the program to him. And it really has brought a pretty substantial peace of mind to him. And then, even more importantly, his wife, who's like, gotta do something about this, gotta do something about this, gotta do something. Something bad happens to you, we're all screwed around here. Gotta do something about this. That was pretty cool.
That's really creative. That's one of the best stories I've heard on creatively involving versus alienating. That one's good. If anybody missed that, we'll put it up on the BGW YouTube channel, and you'll need to look at 28 minutes into this thing. Replay it. That's a really good one. It's interesting that I've got another one, and I may have talked about this a while ago, but there's a coach in town, good friend, that he has cohorts of, roundtables of about 12 smaller companies typically, and the owners are around the table. And he is just vehement about making sure that they are working on their succession plans. And one of his members did and was dutiful about it, young, in his 40s, died right before Christmas. But the plan, which is tragic. I mean, it's tragic. And his wife was she was not involved in the business at all, didn't really know. And they had been buying a number of other tuck-in companies, and they're really good company. But part of this guy's succession plan, I'm not advocating this, was to have that coach, who has run a number of companies as well, stand in his place in case of something bad happened. He had no plan of that happening. Nobody did, but that coach knew the company well enough, knew the inner workings, knew how to run companies quite well. And so they've continued to move on without a hitch. And now they're transitioning to where they've got the next level of management, because having a coach was an interim step. But nonetheless, thank goodness this guy had done it and didn't throw everybody into chaos like the example that Adam had to help work through years ago. So just a reminder to everybody that's on this call, hit us with Q&A. If you got questions, I guarantee you, if there's a question rattling around in your brain, somebody else is probably thinking about it, but you're probably saying, oh, well, that's a stupid question. No, it isn't. It's just only a stupid question if you don't ask it and you leave this wondering. So in the meantime, there are other things that can be done. I would love to go into, oh, here we go. What plans do you recommend? Buy or sell? Keyman Insurance. Yes.
So
yes.
let's talk. So I'm gonna share. There are three things at the get-go that we need to know. And I say we, I meaning your legal, your accounting, and any other professionals that are going to help you through this process, which is what you got, what do you think you'll have, and what do you want to do with it? And in between those, there's stopping points like when you want to do what you want to do with it. When do you think that things will change? And so with those three pieces of information, then everything else falls into place, because Adam was talking about, and we talk about, you can do this, you can do that, and that's where it becomes very overwhelming. And so if you involve people, and it wouldn't be me, it would be, for example, Stephanie Daniel in my office, who I think you guys know, and she's been on this program before. She's worked with some people that are in the audience, I know. And then she'll say, okay, using those three pieces of information, fill into those points as to when and what. So for example, there's someone on the line today that working on a transition, and an older gentleman, let's say, that may have some availability and has options at that age that you don't necessarily have 20 years earlier. With respect to lifetime exemptions, and maybe some other things going on. And at that point, you also have income with, respect to Social Security and other things. And so, as you go through this, it really is dependent on those three variables. And then you start talking about, okay, buy sells. You start talking about, how do I fund this kind of stuff? And I'm going to throw a shout out there, because I owe this person that from many years ago. So Clint Crocker, you go to someone like Clint and you get insurance for things like this. And the reason why I'm shout out for Clint is we are both fathers of teenagers. And several years ago in middle school, I volunteered myself to coach intramural basketball. And I voluntold Clint that because his son and my son were on the team. And so I voluntold him that he was going to do that. And then he relented and said yes. And he was awesome with the logistics and positions and plays. And I was like, okay, this is awesome, because that's, I just wanted to help people shoot the ball into the goal. So anyway, so then you talk about, is it a buy sell? Is it that the company is going to pay the premiums? Who's the beneficiary? Then we talked about the shareholders agreement, operating agreement. Those things have to match and marry up to, okay, this is how it's going to happen. And so here's the money that's coming in to buy that kind of stuff. Or, is it a transition? Are you setting up trust for grandchildren? Do you have generation skip tax stuff going on? Do you have, certain provisions that are going to sunset in a couple of years? So there's all these things. And I'm not trying to make a mountain out of it, because it already is a mountain. What I'm suggesting to you is you not try to conquer that mountain on your own, and that you take it piece by piece, because if you think like anything else, what needs to be done, how you're going to get there, it's just going to create a fog in your mind, and the natural reaction is mañana, tomorrow.
Yeah.
Mañana, right? I'll get to it later. And you don't. And then you end up in the hospital with COVID, almost dying, essentially. And that is, I am over dramatizing it, but it's a true story. And so, deal with it now and go through the process, but take it in bits and pieces.
So Andy was paying attention. It's so good to see you here, Andy. You just make me smile. But in true to form Andy Hilliard fashion, he's got a very creative idea here, and I like it. So I'm going to read it. It says, is a good start to write a story that covers a death scenario and who is in charge, who does what, etc., and then take that to a lawyer to dedicate in a legal format. Who do I share it with? Added to what? Shared with who? Added to what? And then he does a follow on. What does the succession plan look like? Like a recipe? Is it added to a will, operating agreement, company minutes? How do you align the will, succession plan, and other company and personal docs? Great questions, Andy. Jump ball.
You want me to take that one too?
I was actually, I've got a thought together, Jack, if that's okay.
Okay.
But it's gonna, and feel free to save me from myself here in a second. A lot of the answer to that question resides in what Jack just said in the previous statement, which is, if my net worth is $100 million and my business is worth $5 million, I don't really care as much than if my net worth is $5 million and my business is worth $5 million. So it's all my net worth. This is my principal form of, asset that will take care of my family. But I think, kind of the first question that you really need to ask yourself, I think, really is, do I want this thing to be still in my family upon my death, or do I want it to be out of my family and paid out beyond my death? That's going to help you make some decisions. Another thing that's going to help you make some decisions is, whether or not you're insurable or not. If you're uninsurable, that's going to take you down one route. Whereas if you're insurable, that is a way to reduce a lot of risk off your plate. But directly to the question in terms of writing down what you would like to have happen, that's a good starting point. And then, start to challenge yourself to say, well, if I'm the recipient of this plan, so for example, hey, if I was to die, I'd like my son to step in, take over, run this, but how do you know the employees are going to stay?
Yeah.
Like you start to hit, oh, wait, got it. So I need to do something to make sure that they're here to help out with the orderly transition. That starts leading you to kind of unwrapping, some more stuff, to where once you start to get your bases kind of covered off on, again, I wouldn't do any of this in the vacuum, but once you do start to get your bases covered off on, you're at the point where you can actually start implementing some stuff that actually has some legally binding stuff to it.
Yeah, and I would say, go ahead.
Go ahead.
There has to be a convergence of thought and documents. And what I mean by that is, don't rely upon your estate planning documents to win the day, that's how it's going to happen. So many times I see inconsistencies in that the will says, yes, all my assets, which would include ownership interests, that are in my personal name go to my beneficiaries, typically the surviving spouse. But that's not what the operating agreement says. And many times the operating agreement says that you cannot transfer any ownership interests unless there is unanimous consent of the other members. And at most, you can be an economic interest holder, which basically means you get the dividends, et cetera, the distributions, but you don't get to participate in the business otherwise. And so, those documents need to be consistent and aligned. And so there needs to be attention to the operating agreement, to the shareholders agreement for things like that. And actually, Clint brought up in the chat as an aside that, we talk about death, but there's also disability. What if you're short of passing away, but you're unable to do what you normally were doing? And so what's the plan for that? And, are you insured for that? An aside on insurance, if you do have it in place, it's static, right? So you set a value, let's say, and I've said this before, 80% of what the obligation would be in that moment of a payout to that beneficiary. Business grows, the ownership interest value grows. And so now you only have 75%, 70%, 60% covered. So where's that other 40% going to come from if it's not insurance? So think about those things. And it's, you got divorce. Okay, so interesting scenario. Have a client who is business partners with their spouse that is now ex-spouse. They get along. They came to the realization that they're better co-business owners and friends rather than spouses. So it's amicable. It's a little bit interesting for me to talk and have conversations with them. But one of the ex-spouses is getting remarried. Now, what happens to those ownership interests as between the two of them is in their post-separation, their divorce papers. Now you have a third person coming in. And so now my recommendation is that this new spouse sign an addendum to the operating agreement that is basically relinquishing any claims that she has to his one half of the business if they end up getting divorced, or if he dies and that all of the assets goes to the new spouse. So, it gets complex, but the point is, and as Adam is saying as well, which is, and Gary's saying, that it's documentation and you rely on professionals to do the what ifs. Had a friend go into and talk to Stephanie Daniel about some estate planning stuff, and they admittedly had not really thought about some of these things. And they spent 2.5 hours, 3 hours walking through, somewhat arguing amongst themselves as to how they were going to do certain things. But it was things that they really hadn't thought about that now that they have, in their business plan, their estate planning documents. Some of it was personal, dealing with one minor child, 2 minor children. So, but teenagers, how they're going to deal with those kind of things. So it can be complex, but my point is that, start with those 3 things that I said, which is beginning, middle, and end. And then, we will get help. You will get help in filling in all those things as you go.
So a couple comments. First of all, Joe gives a ringing endorsement for Stephanie, says she's great. And then also following up on Andy's premise, Joe says, work on your company processes, documentation, cross-training, et cetera, et cetera. Prepare your company for sale or succession at any point in time. Good advice, Joe. I also think, one of the questions that you had here, Andy, was shared with who? Think about your team one in EOS speak, your key and trusted team. I love that example that that Adam just talked about, where the key people that, hey, these are the people that are going to be needed to keep the wheels on in my absence. Even if you just said, hey, I'm going to take 3 months off and go to Tahiti, great. Who are those people that you really trust, not just because they've got the seats of leadership, quote unquote, but are you real trusted people? And then you have to take a honest look too and say, well, gosh, do we have holes? That's another thing that you got to look at your leadership team and say, do I really have the right people in all the right places? And maybe you don't, but who among them? That's where I would start. So just my thoughts. Also, Clint, thank you for weighing in here. A couple things that he's saying. So imagine an insurance guy saying this. Yeah, buy insurance. But he said, all these plans are so much easier to execute with funding. Term insurance is so cheap, as he says. It's a no-brainer, but the proceeds need to sync up with the operating agreements that you guys are talking about. Too often we see buy-sell agreements with no funding or funding with no governing docs. So many people forget about those plans for what happens when, hold on here, I'm moving it down. When you get hit by the bus and live, disability. Any operating agreement that should address that, as well as in the contingencies. So good points, Clint. Really good questions. Andy, you did not disappoint. Joe, you always deliver. Can always count on you too.
There was another comment in the chat about information regarding succession planning, death, and bankers. And what do you tell them? So
yeah.
the answer is that you are required to tell them, because at the moment of death, there is technically a change of ownership. The estate owns that, or the trustee owns that. But it does, I think the kind of the question within the question is, how do you handle something like that when you have the patriarch of the business pass away, that is the main guarantor, personal guarantor, and now the bank may feel insecure about the continuation of the business in the hands of whoever it ends up being in the hands of. And so that a lot of times will trigger a substitute guarantor, possibly a letter of credit, or some other replacement collateral for the guarantee of that deceased owner. And so, yes, it does trigger certain obligations. So that's the other thing you need to think about too, is the impact on your business with others. So going back to being involved in your business and being the key person, this is an issue in franchising. When a business owner comes to me and says, hey, I want to set up, I want to expand. And the way I look, I say via using someone else's money and someone else's time, essentially. So you would do the upfront investment. We put together the franchise system for you, the legal documents. But I tell them there are two things that are going to hold you back from becoming a successful franchisor. One is that if you cannot take your processes and procedures and have them in written form, share them with a total stranger, and have that stranger run the business well, then that's problem number one, because that's essentially what a franchisee is. Hopefully they have some interest or some aptitude for whatever business it is of the franchise system. But a lot of times this is a second career, or they're taking some severance and saying, hey, I'm do this or do that. So there has to be that. Secondly, that if you are a business owner, that you are totally indispensable to the business. So you may have the best operations manual, you may have the best processes, the best trainers and teachers that are going to go show this stranger how to do this business. But if they will never, well, first of all, they're never ever going to be as good as you doing your own business elsewhere as a franchisee. But they need to be as close to that as possible. And if it is you're extracted from that business operation and then it falters, meaning you're not going to be at that franchise location either, then that's also a problem. So if you think of succession planning and I've told prospect franchisors, it's kind of like succession planning, because you're planning for the survival of your business through others. And so those are two key considerations. So that's essentially what you're doing here, is planning for those things and being able to, if something happens to you or to a key person in your business, it may not be you. You may be the owner of the business, but you have someone else running it. So you also need to consider that the people that are around you, can they do it without you if need be?
Great points. Let's see if we've got any good questions and good chat today. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate that. So I'm gonna throw you guys a question that involves selling a company, whether it's because it's opportunistic or because we got to, or whatever. And I want to throw out the question in the context of, hey, this thing is set up as a LLC in partnership, or hey, it's set up as an S Corp, or hey, it's set up as a C Corp. I would like you guys to talk about, let's say it's a various different types of buyers. Let's assume one is a strategic buyer, private equity, because there's a lot of money out there right now still that's banging on a lot of people's doors. So let's use that as a scenario versus an internal sale. Anybody want to jump ball on that?
Go ahead, Adam. You can go first.
So, the question I get asked a lot in terms of structure is, hey, what should I be thinking about from that standpoint? And it's like, if it's not going to be internal, one of the things that you have to be thinking about right out of the gate is that, another company without a lot of massive legal work cannot be an owner of an S corporation. So right out of the gate, you're kind of confined to LLC or C corporation, and kind of structuring yourself such that you're ready. You're ready for that as part of the preparation process. If you're an S corporation, it's not the end of the day. It's just you've got to jump through a bunch of hoops and learn words like F reorg and other stuff that has to happen, and creating other companies and blah 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 blah. So that's probably the first thing. So when we talk to people about their ultimate plans, a lot of that's driven by, well, what's your ultimate exit plan, and that's going to be a driver of like what's the best entity type for you.
Yeah, and so yes, when you have it's not an insider buy and an outsider buy. My tax partner, Warren Keene, he will say that he has never formed an S corporation for good reason, even when it was the cool thing to do, right? And so, but there are reasons for that, and it is that first of all, the LLC format from a legal perspective is the best format because it gives you the most freedom of contract in the operating agreement. So, and we've talked about this before, where what you put in the bylaws in a shareholders agreement has to fit within the framework of the North Carolina Business Corporation Act. The North Carolina Limited Liability Company Act, which essentially was rewritten by my partner because he was the chair of the committee back in 2014 that was making modifications to it. And usually the chair gets stuck with doing most of the stuff, right? And so he will tell you that it was designed to be a backfiller, so that whatever you put in the operating agreement is the gospel for that business. And if you need some filler, then you can go look to the LLC Act to fill in some gaps. So rather than it being a structure, it is a gap filler. And so, and then you have the separate consideration, which is choice of or tax tax classification choice. And I think I may have mentioned this either one or two sessions before, that had to put a client that was going way too fast and was kind of checking the box, was redoing his enterprise and setting up different entities to do different aspects of this multi-concept business. And just kind of, well, I did an S corp before, may as well do that now. But now, knowing and having conversation with him over the course of time, knowing that there is an end in sight, that he doesn't want to continue to do this as an operator. He wants to be the investor. He may want to be on the board of directors. He want to be, it's a franchisor. So I call these people ambassadors. So when private equity comes in, it's like, okay, we don't need you to do the back office stuff anymore. We want you to go out and promote the brand and bring in more franchisees. And so I nicknamed that an ambassador. So, but these entities, these companies that are coming in, they don't want to buy S corporations for a number of reasons. There's built-in gain issues. There are, they would prefer to have, per Adam's comment, it's easier to layer up or have a parent company and then another parent company, but you can't do that very easily with an S corporation. And so you're limited unless you jump through hoops like an F reorg, and that is actually a term. It's not a shortened version of a bad word. It actually, in the code, it's the letter F. So it's, there are reasons why, and that again is why you go to professionals, and it has to be a collaboration, because what was happening with this person's CPA, which was not BGW, was they didn't ask the questions. They didn't ask, where are you now? They kind of knew, because with blinders on, because they did the audit, but they never asked the question, where do you want to be, or where are you going? Because if they had asked that question, they would have found out, yes, probably private equity 3 or 4 years down the road. Then they should have said, well, let's hold on a second. Let's talk about why you selected S Corp for these new entities. Shouldn't we leave them as a partnership? In one instance, may we do a C corporation? You're going to feel the pain now of double taxation, but there's a narrow window of maybe a tax-free or low tax transfer of ownership, a merger or acquisition, that might benefit you. And so, but once that ship has sailed, it's sailed, and it's so, think about those kind of things. And some people don't. So it has to be a collaboration, and there are reasons why you choose one thing over another. And without that collaboration, you could be going down the wrong pathway, and it's going to cost a lot of money down the road to correct it, or you just basically give more money to Uncle Sam than maybe you might want to otherwise.
All right, I'm going to squeak in a non-succession planning question from a loyal participant, Twinette, on this. And by the way, she says, thank you for what we're doing. She listens at work, and learns something new all the time. So that's great. Good to have you on here, Twinette. So here's the scenario. She's in healthcare practice. And the question revolves around how healthcare practices can increase revenue to offset expenses when contracted reimbursement rates are capped by the government. Most every other business has been able to increase rates for services, materials, food, et cetera, to help offset the expenses. But the state of North Carolina, it did increase reimbursement rates in 2020 to help healthcare providers manage the additional expenses related to COVID-19. As with all industries, expenses have greatly increased, but we don't have the ability to charge beyond our reimbursement rates to increase revenue. To make it worse, the state of North Carolina just discontinued that additional 5% reimbursement charge, even though the expenses have not changed. Are we the only service industry that can't seem to increase our rates for services to offset our expenses?
No, yeah. So it's a good question. Make it up on volume. I'm kidding with that statement. It can a lot of times feel like, oh my gosh, I'm the only industry that has to deal with this crap. But it really is kind of a fundamental managerial accounting problem that, if you want to get really wonky, is all about, contribution margin and gross profit. Point being that in medical practices, what this applies to any business, but it's specific in medical practices because they're not, they don't love you guys. You don't think as business people do. You think about helping people. So in your scenario where the reimbursement rate is fixed, you have to dive into what's the cost of the service and how do I start providing services that achieve the same result, or pivot into different types of services that have a lower cost of delivery than the cost that I currently have. That's the only way that you pull this off. I mean, so for example, product A may be the best in the market, but it's got a horrible gross margin. Product B is really almost as good. You got to go, but it's half the cost. You got to go product B, and just kind of get over, is that incremental cost of improvement really helping the ultimate outcome, in terms of the patient outcome. In other words, like, if something is 5% better, is that really affecting the patient outcome in the grand, in the grand scheme of things? And I don't, somebody, can listen to this and say, you're a horrible person that, just wants to give the lowest quality care, ever. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that, when presented with options, if you're truly honest in terms of the outcome that you can get, if it's pretty darn close, you need to go with the one that's going to be the more profitable. And that requires change. I mean, one of my favorite examples, of this is that, we were working with a radiology group, and they're like, we're freaking killing ourselves and making less money. It's like the volume of the reads had actually gone up, but the reimbursement rates had gone down associated with the reads. So it's like, you basically are doing more work just to stay flat. And when they went back and kind of looked at, well, what had happened? It's like, well, what had happened is they'd hired a sales force, incented them based on signing up clinics, paid people off of sales volume. So what they'd sell, they sold the easy thing to sell, which also happened to be their lowest profit read. So of course they're making less money, instead of going after reads that had a higher reimbursement rate but required the same amount of time to do.
And I know we're running over time. I'll throw in one thing, which is that technology is a level setter in that. So for example, and I'm afraid to tell my legal assistant this because she feels like that we as lawyers and law firms in our office continues to encroach upon their duties, which is, so next week our IT director is gonna share with us this new program. It's a dictation program. You're like, okay, great. Well, with voice recognition, great. I mean, I can talk it to my iPhone, or I have the Dragon speech on my computer, so I can do that. However, this one is geared towards legal. So it will understand legal terms. Like every time I say the word franchisor, it puts franchise in the word or. This will put franchisor. It has a better capacity. I don't know if it's technically artificial intelligence, but it will learn my voice and my accent and everything else and little things that I say, and will learn as I make corrections, which I think other software does. So, and most importantly, it's less expensive than what we're currently using. And so it is that, management of expenses that is kind of the game equalizer. Now, I also understand and appreciate that at some point you cannot save any more in expenses, because when you start going to the next thing, you're now for your industry, possibly impacting level of care for your patients. And so understand that there are limits, and those limits are different dependent on the industry, but that seems to be the way to, when you cannot out revenue the issue, that you start focusing on expenses.
What's the name of that AI software?
I don't remember because I was just told about it yesterday, but I will find out, William, and send that information to you. Send me an email, and then I'll respond to you directly. Maybe even forward that email that I got from our IT people, so you know exactly what it is.
Can you reiterate what your email address is for him if he doesn't know, or does he know, William?
Sure. So it's first letter, last name, J Santinello. There's several vowels in that, but you'll find me at Shoemaker, and it's SHUMAKER.com.
Cool. All right, guys, we need to sign off here. Excellent Cinco de Mayo discussion. Good job to y'all. May the 4th was with you. and you got Chewy. Oh gosh, he is so cute, man. Can't wait to see him.
Wait,
I have to see him with our meeting this afternoon. Oh, he's so cute, man. All right. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate all of you for doing this. Next week, same bat channel. I may not be on this one. I have a feeling my wife is going to be giving me the evil stink eye if I do this, but we'll see. Anyway, you guys have a good one. Thank you again for your time.
Enjoy your margaritas today. Enjoy your margaritas today.
Chips and salsa.
Sí.
El Chipio.
Muy bueno.
See y'all.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Wow.
All right. See you guys.